an interesting show that also stems from obviously from Jimmy and the lip sync battle segment that he would do on the Tonight Show. The producer here, Casey Patterson, who was at the time with Spike TV and at MTV Networks. She was in charge of production and new programming, I guess, or something at Spike. She heard about this somehow, and she had an idea for how it could work. So I think she went to Jimmy with it, and they talked about it, and that's how it wound up at MTV Networks. Was Casey bringing it over and saying we could do something with it. So I've worked with Casey for quite some time, and she came to me with this thing about lip sync battle, and her idea was to put it in a nightclub. And I said, okay. And I did a sketch, and the sketch originally was a nightclub, but people were seated. A little like you do karaoke. Do you know what I mean? Like you'd go to cooler, definitely a cooler, but like in a karaoke sort of thing where people might be sitting around having drinks and then someone gets up and sings. It was sort of like that. And so I designed a kind of club-like room with a stage. And we built a model, and Casey brought it to see Jimmy. Over at NBC, which was interestingly enough, because I was just upstairs at the time, but no one asked me to be in the meeting. Anyway, she brought in the model, and his idea was, this is nice, but I think everyone should be standing. And it should feel more like you're at a show, like at Pier, what's the name of it in New York? Pier, doesn't matter. Like Bowery Ballroom, like Webster Hall, like any of those places in New York where you go see a show and you go up to the stage and you're standing there. Because the energy of the people will be far more interactive with, people up there. Instead of it being so sedate and refined, let's make it more rock and roll, more party. And so I thought, well, giving me that as that model, I'm going to tell myself a little story that we've taken over an abandoned warehouse somewhere in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and that's the kind of architecture I'm going to play off. So I was actually living in Brooklyn at the time, so I took photos, lots of research, and started developing this idea of how this nightclub had been built by some people inside this abandoned space. And with a balcony around so people could be at 2 levels. And that mezzanine idea that I had barely been able to do for deaf poetry, I brought that notion back, and so that it seemed as if the whole facade dropped below the floor, and there was a catwalk, and you came out the doors down a catwalk, and on either side it dropped down to a complete story below. And that way I was able to underlight it and really get this very dramatic effect of, it seemed as if the floor was floating. So I sort of just started embellishing on more and more on this idea of an industrial space, and what would people do if they took over or created a nightclub new, but in a space like that. And that's how it developed.